and let Jaime introduce himself. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lindsay, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jaime Yordan-Frau. Luis, good to see you. Um, Thank you for being here. This is the second cohort I'm participating in for Intro Strong, and the conversation is ridiculously rich. So I know that we're going to be having an equally rich conversation today. A little bit about myself. My background is industrial organizational psychology. After working in pharmaceutical sales and strategic planning, I opened up my own consulting firm in South Florida back in 2009. We've been in operations for 11 years. And after going through several things, including fire, 2 devastating hurricanes, earthquakes that have shaken us to the core and actually destroyed buildings, including our facilities, and many other things. And now, obviously, the COVID, resiliency and how to stay nimble and flexible and reinvention, which I think it's a term that it's honestly utilized way too much, has been or has become our norm. So I'm here to just share with you some of the roadmap that we have come to learn from and implement for every challenge that we faced with all these disasters and crises, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to then open up the floor for real open conversation that we can actually discuss specific things about you, your businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, I'm just gonna set my timer here because I can get going, and Luis can tell you, I can talk. But anyway, to try to keep me on time, and I will share my screen, and let's just get the conversation going. So today, and the topic I've been tasked with sharing with you is strategies to survive. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. And for this class in particular, I saw an article yesterday on TechCrunch that I thought it was fantastic. When you sit down and think about it for a second and go beyond the actual facade of the news, it really is important. And I want to, for this group, start by saying, when we look at staying strong as entrepreneurs and business owners, we need to, in this day and age, in this crisis, be able to step away from our role of running the business and remember that we are entrepreneurs and put our thinking hats on that have nothing to do or as little to do with our business as possible, and allow our own creative exploration of possibilities, which is by definition what an entrepreneur is, to actually play a key role in this crisis. So this is the article that I saw yesterday. I'm gonna reduce if I can. No, I cannot. But anyway, oops. So Starbucks to close 400 stores, speed expansion on pickup locations, curbside, and more. So at first glance, this actually speaks to a mammoth of a business and what they have chosen to do. But when we think about it, it really points in a direction that is different from what most conversations actually engage in. What I hear locally, as well as in all the other jurisdictions across the nation, the conversations I hear or I partake in with entrepreneurs and just business owners in general is that people are trying to push hard for economies to open up again, for the regulations and the limitations to become lax as soon as possible, because everyone is thinking, I need to start making money again. And what people keep forgetting to think is that, well, there are several components to the consideration, right? Number one, the health related issues. If I open up too soon and the situation is not contained properly and is not managed properly, I'm actually, in my desire to start making money again, I'm actually putting my market and my clientele at risk. And if I do that, then do I run the risk of losing clientele to the disease? And if I lose clientele to the disease, does that actually, or will that actually allow my business to still be profitable and to actually still be able to survive? So the considerations long-term go far beyond the basics of, I need to make money again. So when we look at this headline, what Starbucks has done is say, you know what, I'm not going to sit and I'm not going to push. I'm just going to reinvent. I'm going to keep my finger on the pulse of really what's going on, and I'm going to shift to accommodate myself and be able to still, obviously, because that's the end game, right? It's always about being able to be profitable in the end. But I'm going to do so in a way that actually responds to what's going on, and that the actions that I implement today are not short-sighted, but can be sustained when you look at it from a mid-range to a long-term perspective. And that is something that any of us can do. We don't need to have all the money in the world like Starbucks has to be able to invest in changes that can actually be beneficial for us, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And sometimes do it even within the confines of the limitations that we're living in today, without necessarily trying to push for something to happen that may ultimately long-term hinder our business and our economy in general as well. So my kudos and hat off to Starbucks. And we should all learn and take away from this decision of theirs quite a few things. Number one, be creative and be nimble. Number two, how can we incorporate technology into our businesses in order to be able to move through the problems and the crises as quickly as possible? And number three, how do we stay connected with our customer base and our markets as much as possible during this crisis? So with that said, let me use that as a bridge to the rest of what I want to walk us through today. So this is my plan in discussing today's topic of strategies for survival. Let's split up the conversation in two. Let's first look at the micro, and that will include a little bit of conversations about financial oversight, customer segments, and operational investments. And then let's step away a little bit further out and let's look at the macro. Let's talk about reinvention, redefining business models, and potentially ultimately expanding business horizons as well. So in talking about financial oversights, I want to bring us back to the basics. We need to be able to remember what our break-even point is, what our burn rates are, and what is our cost structure as a business, and how those responded to a reality that doesn't exist, and how those can be affected not only by today's reality, but by potentially any significant or any change or flexibility that I decide to explore into the future. Like I mentioned before, staying nimble, and I obviously choosing a retail business as a model is kind of an easy model to use, and it becomes more complicated as we go into B2B, and especially if we go to B2G consideration, and how do we bring those things in. But still, the driving force of any business is the finances. And that is why within the Streetwise MBA, as well as the Emerging Leaders, we pay so much attention and so much time to discuss managing by the numbers. So let's go back to those basics. And if we have forgotten what those basics are, let's go back and remember what they are. And let's remember how they can change, or how we can be in better control of them as we consider implementing possible interventions or changes in our models. Second is our customer segment. So first is, what can my business sustain from a financial perspective, and how much time do I need to dedicate to considering the financial implications in order to still be profitable? And I'll explain that in a second, because breaking even and trying to sustain a break-even reality for the business is no business. Just operating on breaking even is at best a hobby. And no one puts as much time and effort into a business to just be a hobby or to break even. So let's talk about customer segment. Going back, this is how to link the financial aspects of our business to the customer segment. What is our customer acquisition cost? And how is that changing today? Actually, the investment of promoting and brand recognition and keeping the brand alive in the eyes of the market, and ideally our ideal customers as the definition, right, is critical. And needless to say, the investment has changed. So what is today's customer acquisition cost? What is today's long-term value of a customer, if it remains the same or not? How to stay connected. It is vital in this time where we are still, for the majority of us, under sort of like quarantine, right? We're behind four walls. We cannot be as present in the marketplace as we used to be. But how do we stay connected? And the challenge that I'm finding that most businesses are having is we're drowning in our own thoughts and emotions and circumstances, and we're forgetting to stay connected to our customers, even if they have stopped being technically our customers because they have put our contracts on hold, or they stop paying into their services, and needless to say, you stop paying providing the service. That does not mean that if we want to look at the long-term survival of our business, that we should disconnect. We need to figure out ways to stay connected with relevant information and demonstrating that we are truly a value asset to our customer base by providing value information or valuable information in these times of crisis particularly. And last but not least, do so from a strategic curiosity perspective. So it's not only for staying connected's sake, but in staying connected, I can actually pick up information of what their reality is, where their thoughts are leading them to, and potentially what decisions they're taking as a business that will move them into the future. If I have that information as business intelligence, that will also give me the opportunity to make better decisions on what to implement or in which direction to take my business, and or create alternatives for this period in time and moving forward. And the last on the micro is operational investments. When we remember the 5 stages of business growth article, right, and we look at what the 5 stages were, I invite you to reread the article and understand, if you'll remember from class, businesses are not static. So we're not in one stage and then we move into the next stage, and we are at one stage at a time. We usually have components within our businesses that fluctuate between stages. And then the key is, how do we, as business owners, orchestrate the continued movement of our business through the stages by making sure that we take care of those components that are staying behind, and that we nurture those components that are moving ahead forward. So today's reality is no different from that. And we need to understand which components of our business are within each stage, and how should we treat each one in order to create the strongest possible business that we have and we can. So when we're talking about in operational investments, staying connected, and I'm bridging from the previous comment, has to be key. This has to be top priority. Staying present as well. When you stay connected, one of the consequences is you stay present. And when you stay present, we need to start thinking as well of brand positioning. How do we keep our brand alive in the mind of the customers, even if they're not ready to invest in our brand yet? What activities are shifting in terms of marketing and advertising and promotional activity, and what that should look like? Where should my money be used in today, and use it in a strategic fashion, so that not only do I stay present and try to get as much business as possible today, if that is possible, but how can I hit the ground running as strong as possible the second that I can, because I made the right marketing decisions possible. I kept the best communication strategy possible, and I stayed present. So when we're looking at marketing today, how do we market in what is a stagnant market? It's all about communicating our intent and our goals. So staying present, being genuine, being open. Where are we? So not only seek to learn from your customers where they are and what they're thinking, but share with them where you are and what you're thinking as well. Genuineness is gaining a lot of ground for a lot of entrepreneurs in this reality. So it's critical. Oh, this is a great quote. It is critical to track how customers reassess their priorities, reallocate funds, and switch brands, and redefine value in these times. And this is a quote from How to Market in a Downturn by John Quelch. This is from the Harvard Business Review article. And oops. In this article, actually, they show us these two great representations. So most businesses actually view, most customers, view businesses in a spectrum, right? And that spectrum goes from typically being a totally essential business to being a totally expendable, meaning you may be a luxury item or a luxury business. And then they sort of like created this algorithm or this a table where you, depending on how your clients view you, you can actually decide and define which strategies to implement, which now I'm speaking to the image on the right, how to tailor your tactics in this day and age to be able to create the best potential impact on the strategy. Another great quote is from How to Market in a Recession, same author. And it is well documented that brands that increase advertising activity during a recession, when competitors are cutting back, can improve market share and return on investment at lower cost than during good economic times. So this is, like I was talking before, the moment to stay present, stay active, be loud, be continuously talking to your market and to your customer base. And just don't let them forget you. Now, when we're talking about reinvention, right, we are talking usually about new positioning, new products, or new services, but that doesn't necessarily always ring true. Sometimes it's about new ways on how to do what I currently do. and that is when we go back to the article about Starbucks in the beginning that we mentioned. That's what they did. They're not changing their product line. They're not changing their offerings. They're changing how they bring it to the customer. Um, Redefining business model again is, can we be defined as a value versus a luxury brand? Do we look at economies of scale or economies of scope? And the difference is, needless to say, in economies of scale, we seek volume. So we should be looking at how do we maximize and insert ourselves in as many markets as possible to grow by volume. When we look at economies of scope, we are looking at being looking after demands of the market specifically. So we're looking at creating new products and or new services that tend to the needs of specific niches within the market. So it's both our ways of growing, but obviously it is very different to grow and to choose to grow based on scale versus based on scope. And then, of course, when we're thinking about growth, we need to have a conversation. Do we grow locally? Have I been able to capitalize on the market share where I am? And if I have not, then what should I bring to my marketing plans and to my communication plans to try to maximize my market share locally? But also, is my business type something that can grow locally, or have I maximized or close to the niche if my market is truly a niche market? And then should I just start looking or continue looking at expansion? And in talking about expansion, needless to say, we need to talk about business horizons. We need to, when we're talking about expansion, we need to think about offerings. But in thinking about offerings, it is not and it should not be about us. It needs to be about the customer. It needs to be about what are the needs out there that I can satisfy with an offering that makes sense to the class, to the customer base and the market. So when we go back to the beginning, when we were talking about the micro and staying connected, right? And starting to build it, we don't have a practice of doing so in our businesses today. Business intelligence, by being in an open conversation and open communication with the market in general, but more specifically our business customers, how do I bring that into the considerations of expansion through offerings and through new markets? How do I consider the possibility of collaborations with other business owners that we may know through Emerging Leaders or Streetwise MBA or even Intrise? Intrise can be a treasure chest for you guys if you consider that your best shot moving forward is to create collaborations and or joint ventures. So think of, if you haven't done so, how do I network with, and I believe, and Lindsay can correct me later, I'm sure, but I think the pot right now is close to 6,000 businesses that have gone through it's beyond that have gone through Intrise programs. To be able to tap into that is today more critical than ever. And how do you then build collaborations that benefit both parties and or potentially even joint ventures, right? Now, acquisitions and mergers are also a topic that you could be thinking about in this day and age as we start moving out of the confinements of the restrictions. Obviously, if you have the finances to be able to look into this as an option to grow economically or financially as soon as possible out of this situation. And last but not least, and it's something that none of us as entrepreneurs even want to consider, but it may be a needed thing to consider, is opting out of the business. And we discussed this in class, right? When we were going through Emerging Leaders or Streetwise MBA, that opting out could be an option. And if it is, you also need to take the time to plan it out. So it's not just putting your business up for sale and see what comes about. You need to actually strategize how to do it so that you can get the most out of that opting out possible. So these are definitely considerations that if you haven't started thinking in these terms, you could and you should, to decide where you want to be and what options you really want to consider based on your reality. And that is my 15-minute presentation, which I think I may have extended the 15 minutes, but let's have a conversation, shall we?